There are abandoned houses scattered across America, foreclosures left to rot, Victorian mansions claimed by time, even the occasional millionaire's folly, half-finished and forgotten. But this is something else entirely. Deep in the American countryside, far from highways and hidden from the world by hundreds of acres of forest, stand a structure so massive it appears on aviation charts as a landmark. A mansion with more square footage than the White House. A palace that was never a home. A monument built not for living, but for legacy. And today it sits empty, silent, decaying. A billion-dollar dream abandoned mid-construction, left to collapse under the weight of its own ambition. This is not a ruin from a forgotten century. This mansion was built in our lifetime, by a man whose wealth rivaled small nations, whose influence shaped elections, whose name once commanded rooms filled with the most powerful people on earth. He wanted to build something eternal, something that would outlast stock markets, political shifts, and the fragility of human memory. He wanted a monument that would force the world to remember him centuries after his death. So he began construction on what was meant to be America's grandest private estate. More than 200 rooms, ballrooms larger than hotels, designed to host 500 guests at a time. Underground garages built to house an entire car empire. Vintage Rolls-Royces, one-of-a-kind Ferraris, vehicles worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. An indoor botanical garden the size of a football field, where rare orchids and tropical palms would bloom beneath a glass dome, sheltered from the seasons. Marble galleries stretching longer than city blocks. Guest suites with private libraries, each one larger than the average American home. And then the West Wing, a section of the mansion the billionaire designed entirely himself. A wing so secretive that contractors worked on it in isolated teams, never seeing the full picture. A place where blueprints went missing, where pages were redacted, where even the architect admitted he didn't understand what the owner truly wanted. But it didn't matter, because before the mansion was ever finished, everything stopped. Overnight, construction crews arrived one morning to find the gates chained. Security told them to leave immediately. No explanation, no severance, just leave. Inside, furniture sat in unopened crates. Chandeliers hung unlit above empty ballrooms. Tools lay scattered across marble floors, as if the workers had vanished mid-task. The billionaire, the man who had poured his fortune, his reputation, his obsession into this place, disappeared from public view entirely. No interviews, no statements, just silence. And the mansion, this colossal, impossible structure, was left to rot. For years, locals whispered about it. Hikers stumbled upon its perimeter and took photographs of its silhouette through the trees. Towers reaching skyward, wings sprawling in every direction, windows like empty eyes staring into nothing. Eventually, explorers broke through the rusted gates. What they found inside defied belief. Rooms preserved exactly as they were the day construction halted, down to the dust outlines of workers' boots on unfinished floors. A dining hall set with china and silverware that had never been used, as if the family might arrive for dinner at any moment. Elevators stuck between floors, frozen mid-ascent. A library filled with leather-bound books in perfect condition, their pages unread, waiting for an owner who would never return. And in the West Wing, the mysterious, forbidden section the billionaire had obsessed over, a corridor ending at a bricked-up archway. Beyond it, a sealed iron door. No blueprints explain what lies behind it. Thermal imaging shows only empty space, or perhaps a chamber too large for the scanners to map. Some say it was meant to be a tribute. Others believe it was a tomb. And a few whisper that it was something darker, a place the billionaire visited alone in his final days, before tragedy shattered his empire and grief consumed what was left of his dream. Today, the mansion stands as a monument not to success, but to the fragility of ambition. A reminder that no amount of wealth can shield you from loss, that some dreams grow too large to survive, and that the grandest structures in the world mean nothing if the man who built them can't bear to see them finished. This is the story of America's largest abandoned mansion, a billion-dollar vision left to decay. A family broken by secrets. A legacy locked behind a door that may never be opened. And a mystery that begins not with construction, but with a man who believed he could build eternity, only to vanish before he ever stepped inside.
To understand the mansion, you must first understand the man who built it. And to understand him, you must go back to the beginning, to a childhood defined not by wealth, but by its absence. He was born in the Midwest during the Depression, in a town where ambition was considered dangerous and staying small meant staying safe. His father worked factory floors. His mother cleaned houses for families who barely acknowledged her existence. But the boy, quiet, observant, burning with something his parents couldn't name, refused to accept that this was all life could offer. By 16, he had left home with nothing but a stolen suitcase and a single promise to himself: he would never be powerless again. What followed was a rise so calculated, so ruthless, that even those who worked alongside him admitted they never truly understood how he did it. He didn't invent industries. He consumed them. His first fortune came from buying failing companies at bankruptcy prices, stripping them for assets, and reselling the pieces for 10 times what he paid. Cold, efficient, merciless. By 30, he owned a media empire. By 40, his wealth rivaled that of entire states. By 50, he had become what the financial press quietly called the invisible kingmaker, a man whose endorsement could sway elections, whose investments could destabilize markets, whose influence reached into boardrooms, political offices, and private clubs where most people would never be allowed to enter. He collected rare cars the way others collected stamps. Bugattis, Duesenbergs, vehicles worth millions, stored in climate-controlled garages he visited perhaps twice a year. He owned private islands, yachts that doubled as floating palaces, penthouses in cities he barely remembered visiting. But none of it satisfied him, because there was something he understood that most people never grasped. Wealth, in the end, is temporary. Empires fall, fortunes evaporate, names fade. And he refused to fade. He wanted something permanent, something that would outlast recessions, outlast headlines, outlast even the memory of who he had been in life. He wanted immortality. Not through children. His relationship with his family was famously strained, distant, transactional. Not through philanthropy. He had no interest in hospitals bearing his name or scholarships handed out to strangers. No. He wanted a monument, a structure so grand, so undeniably magnificent, that historians centuries from now would have no choice but to study it. A home that would become a landmark. A palace that would rival Versailles, Blenheim, the great estates of Europe that had survived revolutions and wars. He had visited those palaces as a young man, walking their halls, studying their architecture, imagining what it would feel like to build something equally timeless. And now, with more money than he could ever spend, he had the power to do it. So he began searching for land. Not just any land. It had to be vast, isolated, defensible, a place where he could build without neighbors, without interference, without the prying eyes of a world that had always underestimated him. He found it in the American countryside, hundreds of pristine acres, rolling hills, dense forests that seemed to swallow sound itself. Locals whispered about the land. Some said it had once been part of a forgotten estate from the 1800s, abandoned after a family scandal no one could quite remember. Others claimed the area was too quiet, that even animals avoided it. But the billionaire didn't care about superstition. He cared about legacy. In 2008, he made the announcement that would dominate architectural and business headlines for years. He was building the largest private residence in modern American history. The media called it the American Versailles. Contractors called it the most complex private commission they had ever received. And the billionaire himself called it simply the house. As if there could be no other. He hired the finest architects, demanded materials sourced from across the globe: Italian marble, French limestone, Brazilian hardwood. He insisted on craftsmanship that hadn't been seen in residential construction since the Gilded Age. The design was staggering. Grand halls modeled after European palaces, hidden technological systems that would make the estate fully self-sufficient, underground wings meant to house his art collection, his vehicles, his archives. And then there was the West Wing, the section he designed entirely himself. The section no one, not even his architects, fully understood. When asked what it was for, he would only smile and say, "That's where it all comes together." But as construction began and costs spiraled into the hundreds of millions, something else began to grow alongside the mansion. Tension. Accidents no one could explain. Workers fired without cause. Whispers among his family that the project had become an obsession, that he was spending more time at the construction site than in his own office. And beneath it all, a question no one dared ask aloud. What happens when a man who fears being forgotten builds a monument he can never finish? Construction began in early 2009, and from the very first day, it was clear this would be unlike anything America had ever seen. The scale alone defied comprehension. Over 200 rooms spread across multiple wings, each designed with a specific purpose. Guest suites, private libraries, galleries, entertainment halls, administrative offices, servant quarters hidden behind double walls. 17 staircases, some grand and sweeping, designed to make an entrance. Others narrow and concealed, meant for staff to move invisibly through the estate. A network of private roads beneath the property, connecting underground garages, storage facilities, and maintenance areas that most visitors would never know existed. The main garage alone could house 40 vehicles, not modest family cars, but museum-quality machines, pre-war Rolls-Royces, vintage Ferraris, one-of-a-kind Bugattis. Climate-controlled, lit like an art gallery. Each parking space wider than a studio apartment. Above ground, the mansion sprawled in every direction. A marble gallery stretched longer than a football field, its walls designed to display paintings the billionaire had quietly acquired over decades. Old masters, stolen works recovered through private deals, pieces that would never appear in public museums. The ballroom, vaulted ceilings 40 feet high, mirrored walls that would make the space feel infinite, crystal chandeliers imported from Austria and assembled on-site by craftsmen flown in specifically for the task. It was designed to host 500 guests, though those who knew the billionaire admitted he barely had 5 close friends. Guest suites weren't rooms, they were residences. Each one larger than most homes, complete with sitting areas, private bathrooms with marble drawn from Italian quarries, walk-in closets, and personal libraries stocked with first editions. And then there was the botanical garden, an indoor Eden beneath a soaring glass dome, where temperature and humidity could be controlled to simulate any climate on Earth. Rare orchids from Southeast Asia, tropical palms, flowering vines that would cascade from steel trellises like living waterfalls. A reflecting pool at the center, surrounded by stone benches where, theoretically, the billionaire could sit and find peace. But peace was never the point. Control was. Every detail, every material, every measurement had to be perfect. The billionaire visited the site daily, sometimes arriving before dawn and staying until the workers left at night. He would walk the unfinished halls with blueprints in hand, pointing out flaws invisible to everyone else. Architects were fired for questioning structural risks. Contractors were replaced for finishing tasks too quickly, as if speed suggested a lack of care. "This must last forever," he told them once, standing in the center of the unfinished ballroom, his voice echoing off bare stone walls. "Everything else I've built can be torn down, sold, forgotten. But this stays." And yet, for all the grandeur on display, it was the West Wing that dominated his attention. The section he designed entirely himself. No architect was allowed to see the full plans. Contractors worked in isolated teams, one crew building walls, another installing electrical, a third pouring foundations, none of them understanding how their work connected to the whole. Blueprints for the West Wing existed in fragments. Pages went missing. Sections were redacted or overwritten in the billionaire's own handwriting. Version numbers jumped inexplicably. Version 7 appeared, but no one had ever seen versions 1 through 6. When a junior architect asked what the wing was for, the billionaire stared at him for a long moment, then said simply, "Remembrance." He never elaborated. Strange things began happening as the West Wing took shape. A crane collapsed during installation of steel beams. Miraculously, no one was injured, but the incident was never officially reported. Insurance adjusters who came to investigate were turned away at the gate. A room in the West Wing was bricked up prematurely, sealed before anyone had seen what was inside. When a foreman asked why, he was fired on the spot. A small fire broke out in one of the unfinished corridors. It was extinguished quickly, but there was no investigation, no mention in local news. The billionaire ordered the damaged section demolished entirely and rebuilt from scratch. Workers began to talk among themselves, quietly, carefully. They spoke of hearing footsteps in empty halls, of doors that were locked one day and opened the next with no explanation, of the billionaire standing alone in the West Wing late at night, speaking to someone they couldn't see. But the mansion kept rising. By 2012, the structure was 75% complete. The exterior stood fully formed, a sprawling colossus of limestone and glass, towers reaching toward the sky, wings extending in every direction like the arms of some architectural god. Inside, portions gleamed with finished luxury, polished marble, installed chandeliers, rooms ready to receive furniture. Other sections remained raw, exposed beams, unfinished drywall, floors marked with chalk lines showing where walls would eventually stand. The workers expected at least another year of construction, perhaps two. But then, in the final week of October 2012, something happened. The billionaire began visiting the West Wing every single day. He would disappear inside for hours, alone, speaking to no one. Security was ordered to keep everyone away. Even senior staff weren't allowed near. And then, on a cold morning in early November, the workers arrived to find him standing in the center of the unfinished ballroom, staring at nothing. He looked older, hollowed out, broken. 3 days later, tragedy struck his family. And the mansion, this billion-dollar monument to permanence, died the same day his dream did. November 8, 2012. A date that would mark the end of everything. The billionaire's eldest child, a son in his early 30s, brilliant, charismatic, being groomed to inherit not just the fortune but the empire itself, died in a car accident on a rural highway less than 10 miles from the mansion. The official report called it a tragic loss of control on a wet road. But those close to the family whispered darker theories. The son had been driving away from the estate, not toward it. He had left in the middle of the night, alone, after what witnesses described as a heated argument that echoed through the unfinished halls. Some claimed he had discovered something in the West Wing, something his father had kept hidden, something that shattered whatever fragile relationship remained between them. Others said the son had been trying to leave the family entirely, to escape the crushing weight of a legacy he never wanted. No one knows for certain. What is certain is this. When the billionaire received the news, something inside him broke beyond repair. He arrived at the mansion later that day, moving through the construction site like a ghost. Workers watched him walk directly to the West Wing, the mysterious section he had obsessed over for years, and disappear inside. For hours, no one saw him. Security was ordered to keep everyone away. No exceptions. Those who worked near the West Wing that day reported hearing sounds through the walls, shouting, crying, the crash of furniture being overturned. One contractor swore he heard the billionaire screaming a name over and over, though he couldn't make out whose. When the billionaire finally emerged, his face was ashen. His hands were trembling. He looked like a man who had aged a decade in a single afternoon. He didn't speak to anyone. He simply walked to the site supervisor, handed him a folded piece of paper, and left. The note contained 3 words: seal the wing. By the next morning, masons had bricked up the corridor leading to the West Wing's inner chambers. Heavy iron doors were installed. Industrial bolts driven through reinforced frames. Chains wrapped and padlocked. And then, without warning, the entire project was shut down. Construction crews arrived to find the gates chained. Security guards, stone-faced, silent, told them to leave immediately. No explanation. No final paychecks. No forwarding information. Inside the mansion, the scene was surreal. Furniture sat in unopened shipping crates, still wrapped in protective paper. Chandeliers hung unlit above ballrooms that would never host a single guest. Tools lay scattered across marble floors as if the workers had simply vanished mid-task. In the kitchen, copper pots still hung from their racks, waiting for meals that would never be prepared. In the library, thousands of leather-bound books lined the shelves, unread, untouched, gathering dust in the silence. In one of the guest suites, a bed had been made with linens so fine they cost more than most people's monthly rent. The pillows still bore the creases from the packaging. No one had ever slept there. And in the West Wing, behind the bricked archway, beyond the iron doors, sealed away from the world, lay whatever the billionaire had built in secret. Whatever he had shown his son. Whatever had driven them apart in those final hours. The billionaire himself disappeared from public life entirely. He stopped giving interviews, stopped attending board meetings, sold off major assets quietly, through intermediaries, as if trying to erase himself from the world of finance and power he had once dominated. His family fractured. His wife, already estranged, filed for divorce. The remaining children fought bitterly over the estate, though none of them wanted the mansion. It had become a monument to loss, a tomb for a dream that died alongside the heir who was supposed to inherit it. Legal battles consumed what was left of the empire. Private lawsuits, sealed court documents, accusations of financial mismanagement, of assets hidden offshore, of a will so complex and contradictory that even the lawyers couldn't parse it. But one clause was crystal clear, written in the billionaire's own hand and notarized days after his son's death. No one may alter the West Wing. No one may enter it. No one may demolish it. The doors remain sealed. Forever.
Why?
Some believed it was a tribute, a father's desperate attempt to preserve something of the son he had lost. Others thought it was a tomb, a place where the billionaire had laid to rest not just memories, but guilt, secrets, the unbearable weight of whatever truth had driven them apart. And a few whispered darker possibilities, that the West Wing contained something the billionaire couldn't bear to destroy, but also couldn't allow anyone to find. Financial institutions refused to take the property. The debts were too tangled, the legal restrictions too severe. Developers who expressed interest in buying and finishing the mansion encountered obstacle after obstacle, permits denied, zoning issues that appeared from nowhere, anonymous lawsuits that tied up the property in courts for years. It was as if the mansion itself resisted being completed, as if it knew that finishing it would betray the man who had built it, and the son who would never live to see it. And so, America's largest private residence became its loneliest. A billion-dollar monument to grief. A palace that would never be a home. A dream too fragile to survive the tragedy that shattered the man who dared to build it. For years, the mansion remained locked behind rusted gates and tangled wire fencing. Security systems continued to run on backup power, cameras scanning empty halls, motion sensors detecting nothing but the slow decay of time. But eventually, as legal battles dragged on and the property fell deeper into limbo, the surveillance stopped. The batteries died. The gates weakened. And explorers, urban archaeologists, photographers documenting America's forgotten spaces, thrill-seekers drawn by the legend, began slipping through. What they found inside defied every expectation. The mansion wasn't just abandoned. It was frozen, as if everyone had been told to leave in the middle of their work and never allowed to return. The grand entrance hall stretched before them, marble floors veined with gold, a double staircase sweeping upward toward a mezzanine level where light filtered through dust-covered windows. Chandeliers hung dark overhead, their crystals dulled by years of neglect. In the ballroom, tarp still covered portions of the floor where final polishing had never been completed. The mirrored walls reflected nothing but emptiness now, a room designed for 500 guests that would remain forever silent. The botanical garden was perhaps the most haunting. The glass dome had cracked in places, letting rain seep through. The climate control had failed years ago. But somehow, impossibly, some of the plants had survived, twisted, overgrown, reclaiming the space in ways the billionaire never intended. Vines crawled across stone benches. Moss covered the reflecting pool. It had become a jungle, wild and untamed. In the library, thousands of books still lined the shelves. First editions, rare volumes, collections worth millions, slowly succumbing to humidity and time. Explorers opened covers to find pages still crisp, marginalia in languages they couldn't read, bookmarks placed as if someone had intended to return. One dining hall, smaller, more intimate than the grand ballroom, was set for a meal that never happened. China plates arranged with surgical precision. Crystal glasses catching what little light made it through the shuttered windows. Silverware polished and placed, waiting for hands that would never lift them. In the children's suite, a wing the billionaire had commissioned but never explained, toys sat untouched on shelves. A rocking horse faced the window. Books of fairy tales lay open on a reading table. The room felt less abandoned and more waiting, as if whoever it was meant for might still arrive. But it was the discoveries in the unfinished sections that revealed just how abruptly everything had stopped. Elevators frozen mid-ascent, their cables still intact but their mechanisms seized. Hallways that ended in blank walls, where doorways were outlined in pencil but never cut. Staircases that climbed 3 flights only to terminate at solid stone. Architectural dead ends that suggested plans had changed at the last moment, or perhaps were never finished to begin with. In one corridor, a contractor's jacket still hung on a hook. The pockets contained receipts dated November 2012. In the underground garage, the vast space echoed with emptiness. 40 parking spaces, each one marked and numbered, each one vacant. The car lifts still functioned. Some explorers tested them, watching the hydraulics groan to life after years of disuse. But at the far end of the garage, they found something strange, a sealed elevator shaft, its doors welded shut, descending to a level that didn't appear on any blueprint. Thermal imaging showed empty space below. A chamber, perhaps even a tunnel system. But no one could access it. And then there was the West Wing. The corridor leading to it had been bricked up, just as the billionaire ordered. But time and weather had weakened the mortar. Explorers carefully removed enough bricks to shine lights through. Beyond the wall, an iron door. Industrial. Heavy. Covered in chains and padlocks that had rusted into place. Strange symbols were carved into the wooden frame surrounding it. Not decorative, not architectural, but deliberate. Intentional. As if marking something. When explorers pressed thermal cameras against the door, the readings were inconclusive. Either the chamber beyond was too large to map accurately, or the walls were lined with something that blocked the sensors. But the strangest detail? The sound. Several explorers reported hearing water, dripping, echoing, as if there were a vast space on the other side. Others claimed they heard something else, a low hum, mechanical, like ventilation systems still running. Impossible, they said. The power had been cut years ago. And yet, one explorer, a former contractor who had worked on the mansion during its construction, stood before that sealed door for nearly an hour. When asked what he was thinking, he said, "I remember the day they sealed this. I remember the billionaire standing right where I'm standing now, staring at that door. And I remember thinking he wasn't locking something in. He was locking something out. What lies behind the West Wing's iron door remains unknown." The billionaire took the answer to his grave. He died in 2019 alone, estranged from his remaining family, his empire reduced to ashes. His will reinforced the restriction. The West Wing must never be opened. Some believe it's a tribute to his lost son, a father's grief made permanent. Others think it's a vault containing secrets, documents, evidence of things the world was never meant to know. And a few wonder if the billionaire built something else entirely in that sealed chamber. A place not for the living, but for memory. A room where the past could be preserved, untouched, safe from the passage of time. A monument not to legacy, but to loss. Today, the mansion stands as America's largest abandoned residence. $1 billion dream left to decay. A palace with no king. a home that was never lived in. And somewhere deep within its crumbling walls, behind rusted chains and bricked archways, lies a door that will never be opened, a mystery that will never be solved, a father's final act, not of creation, but of concealment. Because some rooms are meant to be entered, some secrets aren't meant to be known, and some dreams are too painful to ever let die.